Good morning, everybody. Let me call this meeting to order. It is our 56th public meeting. My name is Margaret Hinkle. It's my privilege to serve as chair of the Post Commission. Let me, at this point, go through the roll call of the commissioners in attendance. Commissioner Baker.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Bluestone.
Good morning, I'm here.
Commissioner Calderon.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Commissioner Hall.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Kazarosian.
I'm present and I'm appearing remotely.
Commissioner Luma.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Talley.
Morning, present.
All right, we are all appearing remotely. Absent today is Commissioner Crispin. Let me move now to, I'll seek a motion to approve the minutes of our September 19th, 2024 meeting. Is there such a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second,
Commissioner Bluestone, do you approve?
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon.
Sorry about that. Madam Chair. Yes.
Commissioner Hall.
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarosian.
yes.
Commissioner Luma.
Yes,
Commissioner Talley.
Yes.
I also approve. The minutes are unanimously approved by those in attendance. Moving on now, is there a motion to approve our September 24th public meeting? Is there such a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
second,
Thank you. Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Commissioner Calderon.
I have to abstain from that. I was not present for that meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Hall,
I will also have to abstain from that. I was not present.
Commissioner Kazarosian,
I approve, yes.
Commissioner Luma,
yes,
Commissioner Talley.
Yes.
I also approve. Moving on now to the executive director report. Enrique, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, commissioners. My report this morning will be very brief. I just want to give you an overview of what's taking place today, an event that we have tomorrow, and I'll turn it over in a few minutes to Eric Rebello-Pradas to start the finance and administration update, followed by an update from our Director of Standards, Matt Landry, on the activities of the Division of Standards since we last reported to you the semi-annual report of the caseload in the Division of Standards. As I was mentioning, the last month took there were a number of great progress with the Division of Certification. They continue to make progress updating officer information, getting status reports, and capturing and updating law enforcement officer information as is their mandate. They're also preparing for what will be eventually some needed infrastructure changes given the activities of the Subcommittee on Certification, which you will be hearing about in the next few minutes. That committee has voted to advance the discussions to bring them over to you, and although we will not be seeking a vote on that presentation, there's a lot of great discussion that took place at that subcommittee. We have a panel as part of that subcommittee. There's the big topic of health and wellness that continues to be one of great interest to, of course, the subcommittee members, the commission, and the public at large, and the law enforcement community. On the occasion of that, the decisions that we are contemplating and the recommendations put forward, we are convening a panel of experts that are around at the Boston area because of the upcoming IACP conference that starts actually this weekend. So we've invited those experts. We have a panel and a flyer that went out to members that follow us, the commissioners, etc. This is a panel that will convene at our offices. Participation by members of the public is welcome, but we are asking that they sign up to be able to attend in person because space is limited. But there's an option to attend remotely, and everybody's welcome to see that. We will broadcast that panel discussion tomorrow, like we normally do a commission meeting. So we're looking forward to a great discussion on this topic, very timely and with a great group of people. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Rebello-Pradas. I can share my screen, Eric, if that's okay. And I will share it right now. Can everybody see this? I'll turn it over to Eric.
Right, just starting off with just very, very brief update, FY25 activity. Right now we are in Q1, or we just closed Q1 at the end of September, so first quarter of the fiscal year 2025. About 17% of our budget has been spent. What's really interesting is that at exactly this time last year, we were also at exactly 17% of spending. Our spending plans were approved by A&F back at the first week of October, and that's the green column that you see there all the way on the left. So you see 1.5 million in spending, and you see about another $690,000 incurred, which actually, if you add the incurred plus the spending, that would get you to about 25%, which is about a quarter of the way through the fiscal year, which is where we should be. Enrique, if you could turn the slide, please. And I just want to touch quickly upon FY26, just let the commissioners know that we are in full swing of developing the FY26 budget. As you know, the governor's budget will be filed in January 22nd. So we are developing the first step in that process, which is a maintenance budget. Of course, similar to last year and the year before that, Post will be assembling what I'm calling an evolving budget. Because we aren't really in a maintenance phase. We are still growing. We are still, we are not still 100% operational, and there still are some things that we need to do. So therefore, we want to make sure that we budget resources appropriately for that. However, I will admit that we are leveling off just a bit. It does appear that we are doing that, especially with payroll. So you won't see these vast increases that you've seen over the past 2 fiscal years. There will be more information on that at the next commission meeting. Everything is due to A&F by the end of the month. Once I have briefed the treasurer, Charlene Luma, as well as the executive director, then we will put together our final proposal, and I will brief you on that next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Madam Chair, if there's questions, we can take them now, or we can, or comments, or we can turn it over to Landry, the next item on the agenda.
I'm sorry, I'm with the screen sharing. I'm not, does anybody, any of the commissioners have any questions? I don't think I see any hands in the air. So I think with that, we can move on to the Division of Standards semi-annual report and to Matt Landry.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to give a semi-annual update on the work that's being done by the Division of Police Standards. I've got 2 slides this morning. I'll keep this brief. I wanted to cover the caseload, both in terms of complaints that we're receiving and reviewing, and also the disciplinary caseload that results from our investigative work. So as you can see on the screen, a reporting period, my last update was basically covered the period ending on January 10th of 2024. So from the day after that through September 30th, the data on this slide lines up. So the number of complaints that we receive as on behalf of the commission has certainly increased from the last reporting period. We're now receiving approximately a little over 30 new complaints from members of the public per week. We review every complaint individually. We try to respond to each complainant with some update or a decision once we have that. It can take a while to do that, and part of that is a function of technology. Part of that is a is a function of continued growth that this team still needs to realize in terms of allocating resources to be able to shorten that time frame. But every complaint does get a response, and as you can see here, the 682 number reflects the complaints that are screened in. And to explain that, what's screened out are things that are duplicates. Sometimes people will submit the same or similar things multiple times. Those get sort of consolidated down to one complaint. A lot of times, sometimes people will file a complaint that doesn't actually allege a misconduct on the part of a law enforcement officer. They might allege something for some other individual or some other professional outside of our profession that we regulate. Sometimes the allegations simply on their face are not credible or don't warrant investigation. So those get screened out. The 682 number are the ones that are screened in. In other words, the ones that we consider needing some type of follow-up investigation. So that number is higher on a per weekly basis than it was in the last reporting period, which indicates that the public is able to access the Commission's complaint reporting form and is utilizing that to submit complaints. So I regard that as a positive development. Similarly, the 410 number down below that reflects the number of complaints that agencies are submitting to Post as they're required to per our statute and regulations. So whereas the above number is where the members of the public are directly accessing Post to file a complaint against an officer, the 410 number reflects agencies that are receiving complaints from the public or the internal complaints that they're generating as a matter of internal affairs matters. So those get submitted to us as well. I will say since January, soon after the January meeting, we rolled out the law enforcement portal, which has been a really important tool for both agencies to use to submit complaints to us and for us to be able to internally track those and review them and keep them organized. That's been, I think, a net benefit to our being able to track the complaints, to categorize and report on them internally. And so we're very pleased with the rollout of that portal. Still have some more work to do, but I think the early indicators on that have been it's been a successful rollout on both sides. So if we can go to the second slide, please. And so the second slide concerns the division's investigative work, and I think there's really some notable increases, a significant increase in the workload and in the results of what the division has been doing since my last update in January. So in January, I reported that we at that time had 26 active preliminary inquiries. As you can see here, that number has significantly increased. We're now managing a caseload of 68 cases that are under investigation right now. That's a significant increase from January. Part of that's because, a major reason for that is because we've been able to add additional investigators and counsels to our team, and we're also we're just able to do more. We have more work to do in this space as we do elsewhere, but I think that reflects a significant increase. And then the next two columns talk about the investigations that we've completed. So there's 69 investigations that have been completed. The first category of 58 shows the investigations that we concluded with a recommendation of discipline to the commission. And that is a substantial increase as well from January. So if you were to try to chart this, it would show that it's gone significantly up in the recent months. We've upped it from 31 at my last update. And these are cases that we've recommended that the commission impose discipline, and that's cases that have already gone their way through the hearing process and ones that are still in that process at this time. 11 additional cases, we finished an investigation without recommending discipline, and the commission adopted that. So those 11 have been finalized without public hearings on the officers. The suspension number shows both cases where the officer is serving what I'll call a disciplinary suspension. That is, that there's been an adjudicatory hearing and that officer has been suspended as a disciplinary matter. And it also reflects suspensions that are issued under Section 9 of the Commission statute, where there's a pending preliminary inquiry and the officer is suspended while that investigation takes place. The most common by far instance of that is anytime a police officer is charged with a felony offense, the statute requires the commission immediately suspend that person's certification while the criminal case remains ongoing. That's the largest chunk of that 53 number right there. And then finally, in terms of the officers that have been decertified, in January, the commission had decertified 9 officers throughout its life until that point in January. Since then, the commission has decertified an additional 21 officers for a now total of 30. Again, that's a substantial increase in the from where we were in January, and it reflects, I think, the hearing process. It reflects, I think, the commission's attention to the goals of the statute, accountability and transparency. And I also think that just from my own standpoint, I think it reflects the fairness of the process to the officers concerned and the goals of the statute. So in conclusion, been a lot of work done since January. I'm proud of the team that's doing the work, and thank you for the opportunity to provide the update.
Charlene, you have a question?
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Matt, for your report. I'm just wondering, I don't know if you have this data, but do you know how many public complaints have resulted in inquiries or disciplinary actions versus, you know, complaints that come in other forms?
I know that there have been some. I don't have the number as I sit here right now. I will get it for you. I know that in several cases a public complaint has led to a preliminary inquiry. I think in a lot of other cases we will our investigative steps will consist of asking the department involved for some background material or context where, you know, it might be obvious from a complaint that some kind of interaction has taken place that may be of concern to us. So we need to go, our investigative step will be to ask the department for copies of police reports, body cam video, things like that. In many cases, we're able to resolve a complaint just by looking at sort of both sides of it, and it's clear to us what needs to happen. And then from that, our decision point may bring us to ask the commission for a preliminary inquiry.
Okay, yeah, I'd be interested in that. You know, I want to make sure that we are meeting the standard in regards to what happens when we receive those public complaints. And so thank you for that.
Commissioner Talley, please.
Thank you. This is good information. I was just wondering, are we trending the type of complaints as to monitor, you know, has this particular complaint continued to increase, decrease, level off?
Sure. So one of the good parts about the system we've got is that it does categorize. We track them by officer, by the type of allegation. So, you know, excessive force or bias or unprofessionalism, those things are tracked. The agencies or the civilian, whoever's reporting that complaint, is able at the time they submit that to categorize what they think the allegations should be, or how they classify what the conduct is. And we can run reports that track that both by officer, by agency, and by the type of conduct of misconduct that's being alleged. We do that.
Okay, thank you.
Enrique?
Just to append to that point, that last point from Matt, we are contemplating just modifying slightly our categories in our portal because unfortunately one of the most used category is other conduct unbecoming, where you know it's hard to categorize within those. But we look at those as Matt said. There's ways to categorize those complaints, and we have a couple of people whose main function is really to start looking at analyzing some of the data that is being captured in all of those records.
Any other questions or comments? Let me, on behalf of the commissioners, thank everyone in the Division of Standards for all of your extraordinary work in the matters that have been communicated to us by Matt just now. We are very grateful, and I know, as I say, I speak for the commissioners when I thank you. Moving on, then to the legal update, let me turn to our general counsel, Randy.
Thank you. I will aim to share my screen. Okay. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation? Okay. This will be a brief presentation on a matter that's been discussed before the commission several times over the past several months, and that is a set of regulations concerning maintaining, reporting, and auditing of law enforcement records and information. Just by way of review, the process of developing these regulations began in May of 2023. And at that time, and in November of that year, and December of that year, and then May of this year, there were a series of presentations and drafts placed before the commissioners. And that culminated in a vote to begin the promulgation process in May of this year. And then between June and August, our agency entertained public comments and held a public hearing and made adjustments to the set of regulations. We presented the comments at an August meeting this year, and then a revised draft incorporating feedback in September of this year, the commission's last meeting. And so now at this point, we are returning to the commission with a draft that is nearly identical to the one that was presented at the last meeting. There are only a few changes. One, we had discussed last time that there was language added to provide protection against having to violate any privilege or law. And that additional language applied at the time to agencies and officers, so it would now be edited to extend it to all individuals. We received some feedback in another regulatory process concerning recertification regarding the definition of appointing authority and the fact that that could be clarified to make clear exactly who that refers to. So the clarification was carried over to this set of draft regulations. And then in certain provisions that deal with records of investigations, the language was slightly edited to take into account that there are investigations by other authorities, including prosecutors, and to clarify that an agency must record that an officer separated from employment while being investigated only if that is known to the agency. The idea being that sometimes those investigations by another authority will be kept confidential. And I would recommend, and this was not in the draft, but there's another place in the regulations where it also refers to the recording of information regarding investigations by others. And so I would say that that phrase known to the agency should also be added in that place. And that's the initial statement in section 12031D.
Excuse me,
Then
Randy.
yes.
I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time seeing your screen fully. I don't know if anybody else is. It's certain parts of it are blocked.
Yeah, I believe you might be sharing the screen. So yes.
All right.
Thank
Is that better?
There's still a box. It looks like a dialog box. There we go. I think that's it.
Is that good?
Yes.
Then there was a change made to confirm that if one is represented by counsel in a matter, that any related notice is to be provided through that person. And then in an anti-retaliation provision that was already in the regulations, it was edited slightly to incorporate a reference to the anti-retaliation provision in the commission's governing statute. So those were the only changes. And with that, we would ask that the commission vote to approve the set of regulations as it appears in the packet. Again, with my request that one phrase known to the agency also be added to section 12.031D to account for the fact that agencies might not know of investigations being done by other entities that are being kept confidential from them.
Thank you. Randy, any questions or comments from the commissioners before we take a vote? All right. Then is there a motion to approve?
I so moved with the change that Randy had suggested about adding the known to the agency to 12.031D.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second,
Let me then take a vote. Commissioner Baker,
yes.
Commissioner Bluestone,
Yes.
Mr. Calderon,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Kajarosian, who I think moved. Commissioner Luma,
Yes.
Commissioner Talley,
Yes.
and I also approve. Commissioner Calderon, did I get your vote?
Yes, Madam Chair, I was a yes.
Thank you. All right, that's unanimously carried. Let me thank the members of the legal team for their hard work in working on these regulations over a long period of time. We will move on now to the recommendations of the Subcommittee on Certification Policy. Randy?
Thank you very much. I will again aim to share my screen. I'll try it a little bit differently this time. So let's see if this is better. Can people see that?
It still has that blocked out section.
All right.
Yeah, it looks like there's a dialog box, Randy,
Right.
that blocks part of your presentation.
Well, there may be some pop-ups that's on your screen that's causing that.
Yep, this is better.
Is that better?
No longer.
There's still.
I'm not. Is that?
That's workable. There's a small dialog box at the top right, but that shows only gray. Maybe there we go.
Good.
Oh, that's
Okay.
good.
All right. So this is a presentation on the work of the Certification Policy Subcommittee and key provisions of a proposed new set of regulations concerning the recertification process. So it's not every provision, but it summarizes the major provisions. Okay, just to begin with the subcommittee and its work, that group consisted of Commissioner Lawrence Calderoni, who was elected as chair, Commissioner Hanya Bluestone, and Commissioner Marcia Kajarosian. The subcommittee was active between February and October of this year. It held 7 public meetings, each of which was both in person and by Zoom. And particular attention was given to a number of specific issues dealing with recertification. So one was a draft set of new regulations concerning the process. Another was the structuring and the timing of the recertification process. Then a lot of discussion was devoted to the statutory requirement that an officer must be of good moral character and fit for employment in law enforcement. Also, a lot of discussion devoted to the requirement of being evaluated for physical and psychological fitness. Then discussion of a new addition to the recertification regulations dealing with in-service training and satisfaction of the MPTC's requirements in that regard. Then also there was a good amount of discussion of oral interviews and examinations, also statutory certification requirements, as well as the prospect of incorporating provisions related to performance review. Subcommittee received and it addressed multiple drafts of these new regulations, as well as memoranda on the certification process and how it could be structured, good moral character and fitness for employment in law enforcement, and the related standards of conduct of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, possible steps that could be taken regarding in-service training and enforcement of those requirements, approaches to physical and psychological fitness and general officer wellness that have been taken across different jurisdictions, and how our agency might survey law enforcement agencies regarding physical and psychological fitness. The subcommittee also received a set of public comments, 8 formal comment letters from individuals and organizations, 7 oral statements at meetings, and other less formal questions and comments from members of the public at its meetings. A draft new set of regulations that's included in your packet was approved for submission to the full commission. However, there were certain remaining policy questions that were identified by the subcommittee, and those will be addressed by my colleague Pauline Nguyen in a little bit. And there were certain minor revisions that were made since the last subcommittee meeting. They're shown in the packet. I can address any of those if anyone would like. As far as the sources that were taken into account in developing these new regulations, obviously the starting point is the Commission's governing statute, and in particular, a provision of that statute that states that the Commission shall not recertify any person as a law enforcement officer unless the Commission certifies that the applicant for recertification continues to satisfy the requirements of Section 4F of the statute, of which there are 12. So 9 requirements that are phrased as positive requirements, and then 3 prohibitions. In other words, 3 bars on certification. So for a total of 12. The subcommittee also took into account an initial set of requirements and plan for recertification that the Commission had approved in March of 2022 before it adopted the last set of regulations, but that still has a lot of concepts that remain relevant. Then also the current set of regulations, the subcommittee obviously took those into account, but there was an effort made to eliminate provisions in those regulations that were specific to the initial recertification process that occurred between 2022 and 2024, and also to reevaluate the provisions of those regulations with the benefit of experience. What has worked better, what has worked less well. Then also, another thing that was taken into account was the set of regulations that the Commission had approved concerning initial certifications and self-sponsored certifications. So in that set of regulations, there were certain ways in which procedures and phrasing was refined to improve upon the phrasing of provisions. And so those were carried over to this set of regulations. And also there were comments received from the public in developing those regulations. So those were taken into account here, and an effort was made to harmonize the 2 sets of regulations. Then those regulations that the Commission just approved, as you know, there were a series of public comments received in connection with those regulations, and some of those provided ideas for phrasing changes to this set of regulations. And then there were other ideas from both inside the Commission and outside the Commission, including, as I mentioned, the public comments that were provided to the subcommittee. Now, as far as the set of regulations before you, there are a number of provisions that just deal with the procedural aspects. One would allow for the Division of Police Certification to defer its final decision on recertification to an officer's birthday month. And that would provide a way of extending the certification period for that person, so that person will always come up for recertification in their birthday month. And that would provide a way for the Division of Certification to stagger recertifications throughout the year, which it indicated it would find to be much more convenient and provide efficiencies and administrative benefits. Another provision would extend an officer's certification period while the application has been submitted and it's still being processed, or while a decision is being challenged. That was in the last set of regulations, but that provides protection for the officer. They don't lose their certification if the recertification is still ongoing. Another provision would relieve individuals and agencies of having to comply with provisions and orders if it would violate a privilege or a law, as we saw in the last set of regulations, as long as the commission is so informed of that. That's an example of an idea that was generated in one process that was carried over to another. There were a number of changes made to the provisions dealing with conditional certification and other provisions that remain the same from the last set of regulation. So the new regulations would now provide that a conditional certification is required if an applicant is ineligible for a full certification, but solely because of a hardship, approved leave, circumstances beyond an officer's control, or a failure to satisfy training requirements where the MPTC has in fact provided an extension of time to complete those requirements. And a conditional certification it's not required, but it's allowable where the applicant is unable to complete in-service training, but all other requirements for certification have been satisfied and certain other circumstances are present, such as hardship. Also, where the application is substantially complete and doesn't reveal any basis for denying certification, but there's just certain information that needs to be supplied or verified. And that was in the last set of regulations as well. Then also a conditional certification will be allowable if the certification requirements are satisfied, but the attachment of a condition is nevertheless warranted for some reason. In other words, if our agency saw that there was something that arose during the certification process that provided a reason to attach a condition, even though technically the requirements are satisfied. Now, given that the way that the ability to grant a conditional certification is framed, it should not be the case that it would ever be allowed if there has been a failure of an officer to satisfy a background check, or if the officer is found to lack character and fitness, or has a felony conviction, or has been listed in a decertification database, or is somebody who would have been decertified in circumstances identified in the statute as being a bar to certification, or where the officer has failed to complete training and there was no permission, there was no provision that would provide a grace period to the officer. But those provisions also would relieve an officer of having to satisfy any conditions attached to a certification while they're still challenging the decision. And that was seen in the last set of recertification regulations as well. So now turning to the actual requirements for certification, this draft set of regulations would provide for various requirements to be evaluated each certification cycle. So it would not treat any things like the completion of an interview or a background check or a finding regarding physical and psychological fitness or good character to be satisfied only once in an officer's career, that they would be reevaluated each cycle. And that's based in part on the statutory provision that I quoted a moment ago that talks about the commission certifying that an applicant continues to satisfy the statutory requirements. Then also a statutory provision regarding physical and psychological fitness in particular that refers to an evaluation to ensure officers are able to perform essential job duties. The idea being that that's something that the legislature wanted to make sure would happen throughout an officer's career. Then the fact that even aside from these provisions requiring certain things for certification, there are other provisions that authorize the commission to supplement the statutory certification requirements. So it could always do so in any event. Then taking into account also the nature and the apparent goals of Chapter 6E, Commission's governing statute, and the larger session law through which it was adopted, and the events surrounding the law's enactment, the larger purposes of the legislation, as well as the public benefits of periodically and regularly ensuring that officers continue to possess certain qualifications. Now, looking at the specific requirements derived from the statute, the first three, attaining it to age 21, successful completion of a high school education or its equivalent, successful completion of MPTC approved basic training, those are all relatively simple, and the provisions of the regulations treat them that way. Regarding the fourth requirement, successful completion of a physical and psychological fitness evaluation, there's some more elaboration. It would require an evaluation that conforms to commission specifications, and also require the preservation of documentation or any recording of the evaluation. An alternative for the commission's consideration would be to still require the recordings and their preservation, but not make that a prerequisite for finding that the certification requirement is met, to instead deal with any failure to maintain recordings separately. Now, the details regarding the implementation of this statutory and regulatory provision continue to be developed, and there'll be some discussion of that in a separate presentation later by my colleague Elizabeth Smith. Regarding the fifth requirement, successful completion of a state and national background check, this, as framed in the regulations, would not require the collection and evaluation of information that was presumably collected and evaluated previously. It would instead require agencies to certify that they've provided to the commission information concerning certain things that have occurred since the last certification. So those things are discipline, arrests, criminal prosecutions, civil actions, and any administrative agency actions. The next requirement is passage of a commission-approved examination. And consistent with the statute, an examination could be developed by others and approved by the commission, because the statute only requires that the commission approve it. It could be developed with input from law enforcement professionals. It doesn't have to be written, and it could be administered online. And so in looking at how that requirement could be evaluated, the post-commission, this is just one idea that was generated, the post-commission could take a page from the State Ethics Commission, which administers a conflict of interest training exam that's completed online. It focuses on the law administered by that commission and the consequences of violating the law, as opposed to getting into other issues. It largely presents clear right-wrong issues as opposed to debatable ones. And it allows those who answer questions incorrectly in that online exam to keep trying. And then it provides explanatory information if somebody first guesses wrong, and in order to help them get the answer right. And so in that way, it focuses on educating the person as opposed to just passing and failing. That exam also highlights certain rules that are more complex or less obvious. So if the commission were to do the same type of thing, an exam for officers could focus on matters on which the commission's governing statute focuses. So compliance with the law, policing without bias, policing with integrity, use of force and intervention. Those are some of the things that seem to be featured most prominently in the commission's governing statute. And it could also test officers to make sure that they're aware of the disciplinary and civil and criminal consequences of violating those provisions. So an example that was presented at a subcommittee meeting was a multiple choice question that would make sure that an officer recognizes that that a chokehold is impermissible in all circumstances under the Chapter 6E. The next requirement is possession of current first aid and CPR certificates or the equivalent. And in the regulation, it would no longer allow for an officer who's failed to satisfy that to receive an automatic conditional certification with an extension of time, on the idea that this is no longer a new requirement and it's something that people should be aware of. But an alternative would be to continue providing for an automatic conditional certification and an extension of time, on the idea that this is probably something that an officer would have had at one point and maybe allowed to expire and could fulfill easily again. The next requirement is successful completion of an oral interview administered by the commission, and the regulations would provide for an oral interview to be conducted in accordance with the commission guidelines, which could require the completion of a written questionnaire and discussion of it, the asking of a set of questions verbally in an interview, or the coverage of a set of general topics specified by the commission. And the regulations would require agencies to make and preserve recordings of oral interviews. Now, here too, there's an alternative for the commission's consideration. It's similar to one I mentioned a moment ago, and that is to still require the recordings and the preservation, but not make that a prerequisite for finding the officer to have satisfied the requirement. Instead, address any failures separately with the agency. So the commission could provide, for example, that the interview should cover an applicant's achievements or challenges faced by an applicant or discipline imposed by an applicant and how it could have been avoided, matters on which the commission's governing statute focuses, such as those mentioned a moment ago, or matters that the commission believes should be better understood by officers. Those are all topics that could potentially be specified for agencies to discuss with their applicants. The next requirement is good moral character and fitness for employment in law enforcement. That was discussed in a separate document that you have in your packet. And that document in part explains that the subcommittee identified a couple of policy questions for the full commission to address, and the requirement in those questions will be addressed separately, as I said earlier, by my colleague, Pauline Nguyen. Now, next you have three things that, as I mentioned earlier, the statute frames not so much as requirements, but as bars to certification. So the regulation treats the absence of those things as being requirements for certification. And specifically, I'll just elaborate on one of them, and that is the requirement number 12, which is derived from the provision that would bar certification for one who, while previously employed in law enforcement in any state or United States territory or by the federal government, had their certification revoked by the commission if employed by an agency in the Commonwealth. The regulation would provide some interpretation of that, recognizing that the phrase any state or United States territory or by the federal government includes Massachusetts. And it would place the focus of the assessment on whether certification would have been revoked pursuant to Section 10A of the Commission's governing statute, which concerns mandatory decertification, times when the Commission is required to decertify somebody. And that's if at the relevant time, the time of the conduct, the applicant had been employed by an agency in Massachusetts in this hypothetical, and Section 10A had been in effect. So that, in other words, that would be the circumstance in which we would know that an officer would have had their certification revoked. But here too, there's an alternative for the Commission's consideration, and that is to say that this shouldn't just focus on the mandatory grounds for decertification. It should also focus on the discretionary grounds for decertification in Section 10B of the statute. The next requirement is successful completion of in-service training mandated by the MPTC. And as I said, this is something that's not listed in the statute as a requirement of certification, although the statute does give the commission the ability to administratively suspend somebody who doesn't complete in-service training. So there's implication in the statute that it is something that the MPTC's training requirements should be enforced by the commission. So this would incorporate them into the recertification regulations, and it would say that the completion of all in-service training that was required by the MPTC between the start of the last certification period and June 30th prior to the end of that period would need to be satisfied, and that's to coincide with the MPTC's training year. And it's consistent actually with something that appeared in that initial plan for recertification that I mentioned earlier that the commission had approved in March of 2022. Next, there's a section of the regulations that would provide that the commission can establish that one or more of these requirements can instead be satisfied through a performance review. It gives that option. Following that, there are a couple of sections dealing with restrictions, and those mirror certain restrictions that are contained in the regulations on initial and self-sponsored certification. One is that a certification shall be active only while one is serving as an officer for a law enforcement agency. And another is that one cannot execute arrests or otherwise perform police duties and functions without possessing a sufficient certification and the legal authority to do so. Next is a section dealing with enforcement and discipline, and that has been framed in such a way to mirror the section on enforcement and discipline contained in the regulations that the commission just approved, dealing with record keeping, reporting, and auditing. And so it would expressly prohibit non-compliance, untruthfulness as defined by the statute, and harassment, intimidation, and coercion. And it would allow for violations to be addressed through administrative suspensions with the same opportunity for review that are afforded for other administrative suspensions, and for violations to be treated as prohibited conduct under the commission's governing statute and regulations. It would also confirm that the commission can refer matters to other agencies for criminal or civil enforcement, which is really something that the commission is able to do anyway. So this would just put people on notice of that. Finally, going forward, these we expect to come back before the commission at a future meeting. And until then, comments are invited from inside or outside of our agency. They're most helpful when they're accompanied by proposed changes to the text and redlining. And if a version is approved by the full commission, it would still be subject to a public hearing and comment process, and then would return to the full commission for possible revision and final approval, as with other sets of regulations. So if the chair wishes, I can entertain any questions that commissioners may have.
Thank you very much, Randy, for that extraordinarily thorough explanation. Are there any questions from any of the commissioners? Don't think I see any hands in the air. Let me also thank the members of the commission who have been part of the subcommittee here, and all the members of the public who have commented in the process. So, Randy, back to you in terms of next step, please.
Yes, thank you. As I mentioned, one of the areas that warrants some elaboration and further discussion is the requirement that an officer must possess good moral character and be fit for employment in law enforcement. And my colleague, Pauline Nguyen, will address that as she did at the subcommittee level. And so I will, if it's okay with the chair, I will turn the floor over to her.
Thank you, Randy, and good morning, commissioners. I'm going to share my screen first. And please let me know if there are issues seeing the screen. Are you able to see the screen? Okay. All right. So first, I'll provide a quick summary for you to understand the changes that have been made to the regulations in this area. So after consideration of public comments and many discussions by the subcommittee, the subcommittee made the following proposed amendments to the character and fitness standards. First, it elaborated on the definition of character and fitness to provide a clearer definition. The regulations clarified that a character and fitness assessment requires a consideration of the totality of the circumstances and that no one factor is dispositive. This has always been the case, but the proposed regulations state this expressly now. The proposed regulations provide the factors a law enforcement agency must rely on to determine an officer's character and fitness. These character and fitness factors are now mandatory rather than discretionary. The IACP's Code of Ethics and Standards of Conduct are no longer incorporated by reference in the regulations. And finally, the proposed regulations state expressly those instances of conduct that can be considered by the appointing authority, even if the officer is not engaged in multiple instances of similar or related misconduct. These instances are being proposed to be directly in the regulations instead of being in a future protocol adopted by the Commission, which is what the current regulations state. The main comments and concerns received from the public involve the idea that a character and fitness evaluation should be as concrete and objective as possible, as this is helpful to the public, to the person making the evaluation, and to the officer, so that the officer is aware or has notice of what he or she is being measured by. There are 2 items that the subcommittee reserved for discussion and consideration by the full Commission. The first is to have the appointing authority consider credible allegations versus substantiated allegations or some other type of allegation. I know this looks like a lot of text, so I hope this is visible to you. To give you a bit of context, in the regulations, there's a section that lists the factors to consider in evaluating an officer's character and fitness, such as adherence to the law and demonstrating accountability and responsibility. Then another section of the regulation lists the type of information that an agency may take into account when looking at these factors. This is the list on your screen right now. There are maybe 25 or 26 types of things listed. This list is intended to be non-exhaustive and demonstrates that such an evaluation requires a totality of the circumstances review that includes looking at both the positive and negative factors of an officer's history. Information that can be considered include things like performance reviews, awards and achievements, instances of imposed discipline, and allegations against an officer. At the September subcommittee meeting, there was discussion as to whether to consider credible allegations or substantiated allegations. There was also a public comment at the end of that meeting mentioning that there must, quote unquote, there must be a finding with regard to any allegations. Otherwise, they should be disregarded. Given the nature of policing, that is the only fair way to deal with these issues. And if unsubstantiated allegations are considered, it will open the door to smearing. I'll also note that the term credible, which was proposed at the meeting, is used in other parts of our regulations. The Commission, our agency, cannot generally encourages and requires that allegations that are submitted to our agency are credible, and that term is used. Finally, whichever term the Commission decides to use to describe the type of allegation an agency may consider should be applied consistently to this list. Therefore, the change would apply to number 10, which states credible or substantiated allegations of misconduct, and number 15 in the list, which states the type of credible or substantiated allegations, for example, untruthfulness or excessive force. And with that, I will turn to the chair for further discussion by the Commission or to answer any questions.
Madam Chair, you were muted.
Questions or comments?
I just I can appreciate that, like, people, you know, the comment that someone made in regards to unsubstantiated allegations, but I'm also wondering, what if there's a pattern of unsubstantiated allegations, and do we consider those, right? When I think about things where there may be allegations of discrimination or racism that are not always substantiated. What do we do to address things like that? So that's something that I would want to consider a pattern.
Commissioner Kazarosian?
Thank you. I think we actually had a lot of great discussion about this. And I can tell you that from my perspective, I'm concerned about using the word unsubstantiated versus credible. I would prefer credible for a number of reasons. One is it's still not the only indicator. So this is not, you're going to look at this in the totality of the circumstances. So you're not going, no one is going to be able to look at a credible but unsubstantiated allegation. That would be the only basis for not certifying, but it allows the commission to consider credible. There are, the word substantiated or unsubstantiated conjures up some issues for me from my own experiences where, you know, people may have made a complaint, and I had discussed this in the subcommittee meeting as well. Circumstances where certain agencies may require that person to come in person and meet with a police officer to complete their complaint, and many people are uncomfortable doing that. And so that affects the substantiation. But I'm comfortable with credible because we are able to make determinations of credibility. It's not the only factor that we consider, but I think credibility is an important factor, particularly given the ability for the public to be able to feel comfortable in putting forward complaints or concerns. And we've already have our own checks and balances for minimal complaints that are not going to be considered at all. So I don't think there's an issue with them getting confused. So I would support myself credible. I'm not comfortable with substantiated.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To take an opposing view, yes, this was thoroughly discussed in our subcommittee groups, but I disagree with Commissioner Kazarosian. So for the rest of our commission to understand why. We have testimony from chiefs of police. We have testimony from commanding officers. We have input from other union organizations that substantiated complaints absolutely should be substantiated. And I'm going to use the Boston Police Department as an example why. Directly from Commissioner Michael Cox. Every complaint that comes in, he takes as a credible complaint until it is substantiated or not. So the problem that exists is police officers being treated differently or unfairly. And when we think about a lengthy record of a police officer, working police officers are going to have complaints more often than a police officer that is not out there working directly, answering 911 calls, doing drug control work, doing undercover buys. Some of our police officers have roles in the schools or within the community service room. So the police officer that's out there every day that is going to have 9, 10, 12 complaints, whether they be use of force or whatever they term to complain to the department on, it would be extremely difficult and it would be unfair for this commission to look at a police officer's history and say, well, he's had 9, 10 complaints of use of force or disrespectful treatment or whatever it might be. Therefore, that officer must be a problem. That is not the case. Offenders on the street, some of them habitual offenders, know the system, know the game. They file complaints against police officers every single time there's an interaction to try and persuade, or better yet, bully that police officer not to do their job effectively. So I'm here to take a different position and say that we need to be extremely careful when we're talking about a credible complaint. Again, Commissioner Cox takes every complaint as credible until it can be substantiated or not. So we need to be careful as we stereotype or create a record on a police officer and say, Officer Larry Calderon had 14 complaints in the last 2 years. However, all 14 were unsubstantiated or found to be not credible. So I think we need to be very careful, and we need to make sure that we're treating our officers fairly. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone?
Yeah, I think I sort of have a kind of third perspective in comparison to my colleagues on this issue. And I think it comes down to two things. I mean, first of all, there's clearly an issue of perception here that this language is important to people. It's important, I think, to law enforcement officers in terms of feeling a level of support from us around protecting them from complaints that are frivolous. And I think it's also important on the community side to, a group of people who have felt that they haven't had a voice in the system and maybe have a history of making reports or making allegations and not seeing any result from their legitimate efforts to try to bring matters to our attention. So I think if we believe that this is a meaningful distinction between the words substantiated and credible, that what we're ultimately considering here, in my view, is whether we're heading in the direction of a false positive or a false negative, right? So is it more important to certify an officer who should not be certified and to not require that complaints or allegations be substantiated? Or is it more important that we fail to certify an officer that should be certified? And so, as we're considering this issue, I think that's part of what we're considering is in which direction do we wish to err if we believe that this is a meaningful distinction.
Thank you. Commissioner Keserosian?
Thank you. And I agree. I mean, I can't disagree with that, and I think that's an important distinction. I do want to just reiterate that I think the notion that an officer is going to be decertified because there is a credible but unsubstantiated allegation against that person, I think is not realistic. I think what we're saying here is that the Division of Standards, the Commission, can consider credible allegations, and at some point in time in the consideration, because we have a process. This is just giving us the ability to consider an allegation and determine if it's credible. We get to consider it, and then along the way, it may turn out that it's not credible, it can't be substantiated, or it's frivolous. So it gives us the ability to go through that process rather than stop us at credible and make us only go forward on substantiated. I think that's unrealistic. That's not what the public expects of us, and that's not what our mandate is. We should be able to consider credible allegations and then make our determination, okay, this is frivolous. This is one of those 14 or 13 or 20, whatever. I mean, we have that ability. This is why we have our Division of Standards. And again, this is why I think credible is very important here. That's an important word. And I think it's important to apply to our ability to consider it, not as the only factor, but as one.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the commissioners?
I agree with Commissioner Keserosian. Only because I think if we limit it to substantiated or unsubstantiated, we'd kind of not be able to consider a pool of complaints or allegations that we should be looking at. So I think it would not do us justice if we were to only focus on that term substantiated.
Other questions, comments? Then may I ask you, Pauline, what are you anticipating will be done on this issue after today's meeting.
The guidance that the commissioners have provided is helpful. I don't know if we're ready to maybe vote so that there's some clarity as to the direction of the regulations, or I can work with the guidance that's been provided today.
I would, sorry,
Sorry, no, go ahead.
who was, somebody was just speaking. I wonder whether, I hate to raise this issue, but we can have further explanation of the meaning of credible and substantiated. I'm not sure that we all would have, if we were to write out the meaning right now, that we would necessarily all agree on that. So it does seem to me that it might be possible. I don't think we're ready for a vote, in part because of that.
I would agree. I don't feel we're ready for a vote. I think there's a lot more discussion to be had here.
Okay. Any other commissioners? Anything else?
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand, Madam Chair. Just chimed in. I apologize.
Anything else? Pauline, do you think you have enough guidance?
I do. I think whether we come back with a new proposal or further definitions, we can do that for the next meeting or in the future.
Thank you. I think then back to you, Randy.
Thank you. Yes, I will. If the chair approves, turn the floor over to my colleague Elizabeth Smith, who will talk more about some innovative ways to gather more information relative to officer physical and psychological fitness and general wellness.
Thank you, Randy. So I'm going to share my screen for a brief presentation. I'll try not to take too long because I know you all have a lot more to cover on the agenda. So can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Is there, oops, okay. All right. So good morning, commissioners. I'm going to share with you a brief agency survey that Council Annie Lee and I have been working on and presented to the subcommittee at this month's meeting. So a quick agenda. I'm just going to go over the process of how we got to this point, go over some feedback that we received on the survey and kind of next steps. So this is a brief timeline of what happened. The subcommittee received written and oral testimony. I presented a summary of jurisdictional research to the subcommittee on psychological and physical fitness standards and testing. And a draft agency questionnaire was submitted to the subcommittee for the July meeting, but it wasn't, we weren't able to address it at that time. So we presented it in October and it was, the draft was approved. So some revisions of the draft, some of the feedback that we received is that the Commonwealth already has physical and psychological wellness initiatives and resources. So one thing that came out of the subcommittee meeting in April was to send out a survey to agencies to collect information on existing resources and initiatives. So we have a better idea of how to kind of standardize everything. So here are some revisions to the draft that we submitted in July. We have the survey now focusing on physical and psychological fitness, whereas before it was solely on physical fitness. All of the questions are optional and we wanted to make this as user-friendly as possible. So the survey is able to be filled out either on the computer or on a smartphone or tablet. So next, this is just a screenshot of some of the questions that we're asking. So really just getting familiar with the resources that agencies have. We split it up into different sections based on physical fitness and psychological fitness, and want to get an idea of what worked, what didn't work for agencies, and just see what's out there, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So again, this is just a summary of the questions. We want to get an idea of what agencies are experiencing and any existing policies that they have. And we plan to send a different survey targeted more towards rank and file officers after we receive feedback from the subcommittee. So that will be presented at a later time. We still want to focus on getting this initial survey out. So the next step, we sent the draft survey to collective bargaining units for their feedback. And we received some great feedback and plan on sending out the survey to agencies later this week or early next week. So we're giving agencies a month to complete the survey, and we will send out reminders at the 2-week and 1-week intervals just to follow up and try and elicit as much participation as we can. And then once we collate that data that we receive from agencies, we will present them at a later meeting. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight an event that we're hosting tomorrow. We're excited to host a panel of industry experts in tactical training and testing, and they'll share their research and knowledge with people. This event is free and open to the public, so I have the QR code on screen, so if people want to register for the Zoom webinar, they can. And there will be an interactive Q&A portion at the end for audience members to submit questions that they may have. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we want people to know that physical fitness and wellness are a priority and kind of get the discussion going. So join us tomorrow if you can at 9 a.m. We're happy to have everyone join. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Commissioner Bluestone.
I just wanted to make a quick point, which we've discussed in our subcommittee. But first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge what a tremendous amount of work that Elizabeth has done to gather information and pull this all together and develop this questionnaire and strategize. So thank you for everything that you've done to pull this together. I just have some concern around combining physical and psychological fitness and thinking of those two factors as being similar, and am a little leery of heading toward a conclusion where psychological fitness in particular becomes part of an in-service training model. And as a psychologist and mental health professional, I just want to sort of say that I really think that mental health and substance use issues need to be handled differently and not as part of a training initiative.
Sure, yeah, and I totally understand that. This isn't leading us toward any policy decisions yet. This is really just to get an idea of what's out there, and whether we need to have more targeted surveys based on things that we want to nail down. We can definitely do that in the future. But again, this is just an initial step to start off with. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Elizabeth, I just wanted to say thank you. Great job. Appreciate you working all that in from the subcommittee meeting. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the subcommittee's help on getting this pushed through.
Let me also thank you, Lizzie, for your work. And I don't think I see any other hands in the air at this point from the commissioners. Oh, Enrique, please.
Just a question for the team. There was a second question,
Yes.
second policy question, right?
Yes, well, yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yes, if it's all right with the chair, there was another issue to be addressed by Deputy General Counsel Nguyen regarding character and fitness, and so I can turn the floor back over to her.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sharing my screen again.
Yes,
You can see it? Okay.
yes, you can see.
So turning back to character and fitness, there's a second policy decision to be made before you. The second policy decision for the commission to discuss is whether to require an appointing authority to provide a written explanation for a positive attestation, and if so, in which circumstances. The current regulations require that for positive attestations, the appointing authority provides supporting documentation on request. For negative attestations, the appointing authority has to make a written report to the commission. In considering any proposal, the commission should take into account the burdens of implementation, including the administrative tasks associated with collecting positive attestation reports, and weigh them against the benefit of understanding an appointing authority's determination that an officer possessed the requisite character and fitness. It is noted that the commission maintains a database of all officers' disciplinary histories and would have the ability to collect information from that as well. Options for the commission's consideration may be to keep the regulations the same, meaning make no change to the regulations. 2, maybe require a positive attestation report, but to collect it only on request by the commission. 3, it could require all attestation reports, both positive and negative, be submitted to the commission. And 4, require that a positive attestation report be submitted to the commission in only certain circumstances based on some standard defined by the commission. Again, these are only options. There are a myriad of options that the full commission could take, presenting this to you for your consideration. So taking number 4 into account, that maybe positive attestations can be submitted to the commission in limited circumstances, a proposal was drafted for your consideration. That proposal requires that for positive attestations, 1, a written report be made, the items that must be addressed in such a written report, that the written report is required in only 2 cases. The first is since the officer's last certification, where an officer is alleged to have engaged in the type of conduct that can be considered by the post commission, even if the officer has not engaged in multiple instances of similar or related misconduct. And 2, where an officer has engaged in 2 or more instances of similar or related misconduct. It limits the circumstances in which a positive attestation would be made and submitted to the commission. It also involves conduct that has been alleged since the date of the last certification. The requirements for the written report are similar to those already required for a negative attestation. I just wanted to point that out because it looks like a lot of changes. So this is what a proposed regulation could look like. The underlining represents potential new language to the regulations. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the chair and the full commission.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the commissioners at this point on this issue? Yes, Commissioner Calderon.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure who I'm posing this question to yet, whether it's the executive director or legal, but I'm in possession of a letter that was submitted on the behalf of the Boston Police Department, Police Commissioner Michael Cox. Do we know if that's been entered into the record and has it been received?
It was received. I received it yesterday, Commissioner. It was too late to incorporate it in the packet that had already been distributed to you. But we'll of course, like in the past, when we get letters, we consider them and we'll make sure that commissioners are briefed at the next meeting. Really.
Appreciate that, Executive Director. I just wanted to make sure that it is part of the record as the police commissioner has submitted here in the city of Boston, has submitted a 4-page document opposing what's being suggested when it comes to recertification of the officer on a positive format. Just quickly, in one of his paragraphs, he makes a point to say that the expansion of the requirement to provide written explanations for all attestations places an erroneous and undue burden on law enforcement agencies, specifically large agencies like the Boston Police Department. He believes this goes well beyond the goal of oversight and treats law enforcement officers unlike any other profession in the Commonwealth. So I highlighted that, and I just wanted to make sure it is in there for the record as I received it yesterday. So,
yeah.
Can
I mention something? That particular comment, Commissioner, is in line with some of the comments we received on this topic relative to the burden, the administrative burden. Perhaps this wasn't quite highlighted by my colleague Nguyen, Pauline Nguyen, but the idea would be to really establish a threshold to minimize, that burden. Again, there's multiple ways in which that could be established, but the idea of deploying this to every police officer really does put a large burden on all agencies, especially large ones.
Thank you.
I appreciate the explanation in that. Sorry, Madam Chair. I just wanted to respond. I appreciate the explanation, and I did listen attentively to Attorney Nguyen. But furthermore, the presumption should be that absent of evidence to any contrary, all officers possess moral character and fitness for duty. Again, directly from Commissioner Cox himself here in Boston. So the idea that we may be able to change or realign or make exceptions to our discussion, I guess I would say, on ways that we can make this work better. In any way that we're treating a police officer that has already been certified and is up for recertification, if we're going to attempt to put this undue burden on any police department in the Commonwealth, it flies in the face of all police officers who should be presumed to already possess the moral character and fitness for duty because they've been certified by their authority. Specifically here in Boston, where I'm employed, and again, under this letter from Commissioner Michael Cox, I want to make sure that I stress that we're in total disagreement with putting this burden on the department, even if it's in a watered down version. But I'll keep an open mind, obviously, as a commissioner, as we move forward on ways that we can work best for the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Commissioner Bluestone.
I just wanted to weigh in independently of the law enforcement perspective, just as an administrator and a business owner, that I do think we have an obligation to think about the administrative load that would impose on supervising or appointing authorities, and also the complexity of the task. And if there are ways to keep it simple, I'm really in favor of us trying to find a simple solution.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners or questions? Yes. Lester, please.
Yeah, I just want to echo those comments. Going through these first rounds when this was all initiated, there is an undue burden on the agencies, and to increase it is just going backwards, in my opinion. And I think we do need some changes to take that burden off.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Anybody else? All right. Enrique, how will commissioners have any access to Commissioner Cox's 4-page letter?
We'll make sure we distribute it Commissioners. We just didn't have time to put it in the packet, given that it literally came in yesterday afternoon. We didn't want to presume that to distribute, to have a discussion on it right now. But we'll make sure that gets distributed to commissioners today.
Thank you. All right, I think Randy, back to you.
Yes, thank you. I will now, it's okay with the chair, turn the floor over to another colleague, Council Annie Lee, who will continue with her discussion of the agency certification initiative that, as you all know, she's been working hard on.
Thank you, Randy, and good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Today, I expect my presentation is going to be brief. There's no deck. We're not going to be voting on anything, just brief updates on matters that were presented to the Commission last month. So last month, you'll recall that the Commission voted to approve, or shall I say, voted to confirm a draft of use of force certification standards. The Commission was also presented a draft of use of force reporting standards as well as code of conduct standards, but neither of those were confirmed or voted on. Today, I just want to close the loop on use of force reporting and code of conduct. First, starting with use of force reporting. As we work on this, we continue to hear that there's a little bit of confusion of what is going on, particularly with respect to use of force and use of force reporting, because there's already existing work in this area. And so starting with the standard that was presented to you last month, you were presented a use of force reporting standard that addressed certain elements of what should be included in a future use of force reporting standard, including reporting use of force incidents, excessive force, how the public can file complaints about use of force, how agencies should investigate, analyze, and resolve reported use of force incidents, record and evidence maintenance for the purposes of facilitating investigation, analysis, and resolution, and finally, training. As we went through the use of force reporting standard, and this equally applies to the use of force standard itself, we saw that many sections of those standards incorporated a number of requirements already set forth in the Commission's use of force regulation, which was promulgated approximately 3 years ago at 555 CMR 6. So in a sense, I think it's fair to characterize use of force and use of force reporting agency certification standards as building upon the Commission's existing work. And so as part of this work on agency certification standards, we're required to consult with the MPTC, which was intimately involved in the development and promulgation of the use of force regulations. MPTC has identified sort of a number of topics that they would like to talk more in depth about with respect to the use of force regulation in 6, as well as the draft use of force standard and use of force reporting standard. I'll also mention that part of this work also includes developing a model use of force policy as well as a standard use of force reporting form. And that is more like 555 CMR 6 in that the Commission is required or obligated to undertake this development work jointly with the MPTC rather than just in consultation with the MPTC, which is the requirement for agency certification regulations. And so in sum, we continue to hear a lot of feedback from the MPTC. I anticipate that we'll be back before you in the future with significant topics for discussion for this commission about not only the use of force standard, but also use of force reporting standard, potential amendments to the use of force regulation, which was previously passed, as well as the model use of force policy and a standard use of force reporting form. And so.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker?
Yes, I'm just inquiring as to this topic that we're on now. Chief Hicks of NATIC and head of the MPTC submitted a 13-page document with regards to some experts in this field that were, that he wanted submitted for this topic. Has that been done? He's reached out to me that he hasn't received feedback that it was included in these discussions.
Right. So we have been considering that at the staff level. We continue to meet and coordinate with MPTC to first see if we can resolve any of these comments and feedback that were provided by a consultant retained by the MPTC and the commission to work on the model use of force policy. I think that after we've been able to resolve as much as we can internally on the staff level, if there are still any remaining feedbacks or comments that we can't come to a resolution on or can't come to a compromise, I think that would be the appropriate time to then bring it forward to this commission to sort of say, here are the sticking points. Here's, a staff level sort of recommendation from the post commission. Here's also the feedback received from this consultant, and here's the MPTC perspective, and then tee it up for this commission's discussion.
I just, if I can just add my comments to that, I think it's critical. That's the agency that trains the police officers around the Commonwealth. And if, they feel the need to get this consultant to do this work and they want to give you this information, I think it's something that should be at the forefront in the decision making.
Right, absolutely. And, it's not, we're not trying to sort of prevent the commission from sort of having this information available to it, but we certainly want to, because there's just so much in this, we want to make sure that we narrow it down to sort of what are the most critical pieces, right? If there's feedback that we can resolve internally, then, it doesn't necessarily seem prudent to kind of focus the commission on it when it seems that both the commission and the MPTC are in agreement about it. But we can certainly bring that forward.
So you guys are in touch with Chief Hicks and the rest of the MPT staff on this. The way I took it from him is that they're kind of in limbo now as to where this document stands, to be quite blunt.
I think that's been answered.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Baker. Commissioner Calderon has had his hand in the air, Commissioner Bluestone, and then others may have further thoughts on this particular issue. Commissioner Calderon, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Attorney Lee, thank you for the explanation as well. I was concerned, so I wanted to echo Chief Baker, as I've been contacted myself from members of the MPTC. By statute, I know we're all in agreement and we all have the same understanding that by statute that the commission is to work with MPTC on these regulations, guidelines, and things that we put forth. I sincerely appreciate naturally that the staff is the one that's doing this work and that Annie's spearheading it, or I believe Annie's spearheading it, but I just want to echo the chief and make sure that the MPTC is included every step of the way, because it's the MPTC and the actual commissioners that is supposed to promulgate these rules, vote on them, and put them forward, even though we know the staff is doing the work. But we want to make sure that the appearance of anyone being cut out, whether it be the commission or the MPTC, does not happen. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Appreciated that.
Commissioner Bluestone, please.
I'm just would like to request a copy of that document since it's coming up for discussion. Is that something that could be sent out to us, please?
Yes, I second that request. If we could see this particular, did you say a 13-page document from Chief Hicks, particularly given his role in the issues that we are addressing. Commissioner Keserosian, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to state from my perspective, I mean, we all know that we have to work with the MPTC on anything having to do with the use of force, and we have done it in the past very successfully. And I don't think I heard anything to suggest that it's not being done now or it won't be done in the future. So I look forward to continuing this, to work in partnership with the MPTC to review these and to improve them or change them, whatever we're going to do. So I didn't hear anything that suggested otherwise.
Thank you. Enrique?
Yeah, and I was just gonna say that it's been ongoing. It's it's happening. The working with the NPTC, is ongoing. I don't want to create the impression that it's not. We consult with them, all the time. We're having regular meetings in between their meetings and our meetings, so that there's no misunderstanding. There was a misunderstanding, unfortunately, a meeting ago, almost a month ago, when we first put this in the agenda. They thought that we were going to be voting on a particular topic, the use of force, and it was really just a preliminary presentation with a vote to be considered for agency certification, as Annie explained earlier. So I just don't want to create the narrative or give the impression that we're doing things on our own. We're not. We are consulting with them regularly.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker. Lester, you're muted.
If I gave that impression, I apologize. I'll scream it from the highest mountain. I think this commission works very good with the chiefs, the MPTC as well. I am trying to do just that to make sure we don't have any misunderstandings and that we clearly send the message along. We definitely work great together. So I'm just trying to clear this up so we don't have any misunderstandings. So my intentions were not to say that, that the chiefs feel or the MPTC feels that you're not working with them. I just want to make sure there are no misunderstandings and that we just get the chiefs' concerns to the appropriate people.
Thank you. And Commissioner Calderon.
Yeah, well said, Chief. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the only follow-up, excuse me. Sorry about that. The only follow-up that I would add is, Mr. Director, maybe in the future when these documents come in from any agencies, could we make sure that the commissioners actually get a copy of it as the ongoing conversations are happening? That way there's no appearance of anything, because I agree with the chief. I don't think that's what he or I was saying, but in the future, if we have a copy of everything ahead of time, I think it will.
Absolutely. Commissioner, I will ask the question. Would you like to see these kinds of documents as they come in, or would you like to see them as part of the packet when we have that discussion? That could also be a source of, or both. We could distribute in both cases. We all get a lot of emails sometimes. We'll make sure that that you both get them when they come in, and we put them in the packet whenever we have a discussion that's related to that.
I appreciate that. I think as they come in, if you share these with the commissioners, it'll give us the opportunity to read them ahead of time and probably give some feedback along the way too, instead of waiting until we get to a certain point. That way everybody has it. That's a great idea. Thank you.
And if I may, to clarify, the document that has been discussed here was not a letter by the MPTC itself. It was a letter or a memo that was provided to post staff from a consultant that was retained by the MPTC and the Post Commission on the model use of force policy. He provided comments on the use of force agency certification standard, given the close sort of alignment, or at least the overlap between these two documents. And so, at the time it came in, I think it was directed internally. It was about the internal development process. So we certainly understand that this is something that the commissioners would like to see, and we can certainly pass it along. But by no means were we preventing or trying to bar the MPTC from communicating with members of the commission.
Thank you, Annie. I think we understand that and appreciate the comments that have been made along that line. Any other comments or questions from commissioners on this issue? If not, Annie, did you have another matter you were going to address?
Yes, I wanted to briefly address code of conduct standard. So last month, we also discussed or presented a draft code of conduct standard, which is also included in your packet. Last month's code of conduct standard can largely be sort of broken down into affirmative obligations and negative obligations. Affirmative obligations meaning officers should be required to take certain actions or act in a certain way that promotes the priorities and values of the commission's enabling legislation, Chapter 6E, which is the commission's governing statute, as well as those values and principles articulated in the IACP's Code of Ethics and Standards of Conduct, which, as Deputy General Counsel Nguyen discussed, the commission previously incorporated by reference into the criteria for assessing officers' good character and fitness for employment. The second set of affirmative obligations also speak to compliance obligations. So to essentially comply with federal, state laws, rules, regulations, policies, regulatory or judicial orders. In terms of negative obligations, the negative obligations are meant to bolster essentially affirmative obligations, and also meant to proactively address behavior that has historically formed the basis for complaints against law enforcement officers. And lastly, there was an applicability section. And so following the commission's September meeting, the commission incorporated feedback concerning the importance of protecting constitutional rights of those who are targets of law enforcement surveillance, investigation, and arrest. The code of conduct standard that is in your packet was therefore revised to require compliance with constitutional requirements concerning surveillance and investigation. And I can briefly share my screen just to illustrate that for you. So here you'll see in this red line, we added in surveillance and investigation to this section on requiring officers to comply with constitutional requirements. And like I said earlier, we're not seeking a vote or a confirmation on this draft code of conduct standard at this time because we continue to consult with the MPTC, and we expect to review a further revised code of conduct standard with the commission in due course. Thank you. Madam Chair, I believe you're still muted.
Apologize. Commissioner Calderon.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have full of questions today. Attorney Lee, that consultant firm from the previous conversation, sorry, can you share that consultant firm name with me?
Yep, it's the Daigle Law Group, specifically Eric Daigle.
Specifically, I'm sorry.
Eric Daigle.
Eric Daigle. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? If not, thank you very much, Attorney Lee, for your presentation. Thank all the presenters today. I think with that, there are no matters not anticipated by the chair at the time of posting. We will now go into executive session in accordance with General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 21A1, to discuss the discipline or dismissal of or complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employee, or individual. Also under Chapter 38, Section 21A5, to discuss the investigation of charges of criminal misconduct. Under Chapter 38, Section 21A7, combined with Chapter 6E, Sections 8C2, and to the extent they may be applicable, Chapter 6, Sections 168 and 178, to discuss the initiation of preliminary inquiries and initial staff review related to the same and regarding certain criminal offender record information. And under Chapter 38, Section 21A7, combined with Sections 22F and G of Chapter 38, to discuss and approve the minutes of the prior executive session. We will be considering reports of preliminary inquiry in 2 cases. We will be considering the request to enter into voluntary decertification or suspension agreements with regard to 2 cases. And we will be considering the Division of Standards request for approval to conduct preliminary inquiries in 8 cases. And we will also be approving the minutes of the executive session of September 24th of this year. And I think with that, Enrique, do you want to just remind the members of the public as to if they have any questions or comments, how they can communicate with Post?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. As usual, in our website, mapostcommission.gov, there's a number of ways to send us comments. Some people actually did today on the Q&A, and some of those questions were answered. But again, through our website, any one of our emails or phone numbers are available for the public.
Thank you. And members of the public, we will not be resuming after our executive session. We will not be coming back into any public meeting. Let me thank all the members of the Post staff who have worked so hard and diligently on the matters that have been addressed today. We, as commissioners, are very grateful for your hard work and the quality of what has been accomplished thus far. And I think with that, we are ready to leave the public meeting, are we not? Randy, is there anything else we should be taking up?
No, and I just want to say a lot of ground's been covered here, and we invite any commissioners to raise any questions regarding any of these matters with the staff in between meetings, so that we can address them before they come up in the meeting. So that's it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank the members of the public who have been part of this meeting. And with that, we will be leaving this. There will be a separate Zoom link for us to address, and we'll take a 5-minute recess, commissioners, before we go into executive session. Thank you.